Top 5 mistakes machinists make when repairing Mercedes cylinder heads. If you have a 230 SL or a Fin car, a W108 with a 6-cylinder gasoline engine, well, yeah, all those cars had 6-cylinder gasoline engines. Any Mercedes with a 6-cylinder gasoline engine, but particularly cars from that group, either a 114 or a 108 or a 111 coupe or a 113, there is a very particular set of problems that you can encounter with a cylinder head failure. And cylinder head failures are, unfortunately, on these cars, all too common because a lot of the people who bought these cars new were rich idiots with their heads in the clouds who don't even pay attention to the temperature gauge. They just assume the car's going to be fine. They do this for a long time. They don't maintain the temperature, the car's cooling system. They don't look at the gauge. They don't look at the thermostat, and they cook the frickin' engine. They warp the head. So, without further ado, this is a 130 016 0701 cylinder head from a 280 SL or 280 SE sedan, but probably a 280 SL that we found that is junk. And the reason it's junk is because it's been warped 40 thousandths of an inch and it's been cut down 3 times. Now, when a cylinder head warps, the bottom warps, and it doesn't warp end to end, it will warp side to side, it'll warp diagonally, it'll warp unevenly where it got hotter, so maybe you'll have more of a bow in this end. And then when you're done, not just the bottom warps, but the top warps too. That means if the head is permanently warped, then the bottom of the head has to be cut to where it's smooth, and the top of the head has to be cut to where it is smooth too, which leads to my first error that a lot of people don't recognize. That in order to do a proper repair on a warped head, you have to machine the bottom and the top flat. And we're talking about fractions of a millimeter or thousandths of an inch, but it all matters because you can't even do it with your fingers, Thomas. Because if you don't get it perfectly flat and true, then your head gasket will blow within a short period of time. Now, what happens if you cut the head too thin? Well, this leads to my second mistake. If you cut it too thin, then your valves protrude too far. They go in these holes. There aren't any valves in this head. But this valve in particular, the intake valve, will hit the piston and you'll get tap it. Now, a lot of people will shim the cam stands. They'll put right here where the cam stand bolts up, they'll put a little tiny shim here to get the camshaft up, and that is a legitimate repair. You have to calculate the ratio, and yes, you can use that to fix an extremely warped, very rare head that you've had to cut past the limit, but it's really not a good idea. You really, under all circumstances, should either try to deck weld the head and remachine the surface, which is doable if you have the right tools. You can literally clean the head, smear a giant hot blob of aluminum on, and redo the surface of the head. But in order to actually true a head like this one, you have to pull every single thing out. These locating pins, these studs, everything. These plugs. You have to cut down the surface of the head until it's smooth again. But cutting the head too thin is my second mistake. And when you cut the head too thin, not only is it susceptible to more warpage, but it's also susceptible to valves hitting pistons or, the valves beating the crap out of their seats. There are a lot of bad things that can happen, but the most common one is when you hear valve-piston collision. Now, a third problem that a lot of machinists don't address is they don't pressure test the heads to look for corrosion. And corrosion can occur in a lot of places, but the most common place to get corrosion is where you have water passages in between the cylinders where they eat into what's called the fire ring, and then it can get into the combustion chamber. Another one is up here where the exhaust valves are in these little holes. You can get through corrosion, and you'll get water leaks above the exhaust valve because you get a breach from the exhaust passage to the water jacket, but not pressure testing the head and properly addressing corrosion is another issue. It doesn't mean that all corrosion should be fixed, but it really should be looked at. Now, my fourth mistake has more to do with the oil tightness of the head, because right here where the valve adjusters go, and these threads for the valve adjusters go straight above the spark plug hole, if you don't put thread sealant on these guys, Aaron Householder likes to talk about this, by the way, so Aaron was the first person who really did a good job making me aware of it, you'll get an oil leak right on top of the spark plug hole, because the valve lash adjusters will start to drip oil right on top of the plug. And if you think that having a mechanically set valve clearances after removing a lash adjuster is annoying, wait until you have to clean up a camshaft lobe on these, and this is where I think things get really interesting. We're going to do a video at some point about worn out camshafts and what can be done to address the problem, but my favorite problem that I think a lot of machinists fail to deal with on these engines is they don't clean out the oil supply passage for the camshaft, and they don't clean out the, well, if you're putting the head on, I guess it's a mechanics problem too, they don't clean out the oil sump, and then oil sludge makes its way into the cam passage and you wipe the cam. You get a damaged cam lobe because you're not getting enough oil to that lobe. And this whole problem is exacerbated by the fact that on one of these M130 engines, you can't just unbolt the cam, because the cam supports, the things that hold the cam, are also head bolts. If you take all that torque off of the head, you're going to loosen up the head gasket and you'll blow a head gasket, and you may even cause your head to unnecessarily warp, which is really annoying. But a lot of these heads have been improperly machined. Now, my real fifth mistake is this. When they put the valves back in, they use valves, or the valve stem, the part that rides up and down in the valve guide, is already worn out, and they tumble them in a media blaster and then put them in. The little micro pits that the media blaster makes actually wear the new guides out. And if you are like me and you have to fix a lot of people's mistakes, sometimes these guides are not put in properly either. These guides are knocked in, they're hammered into the head. That's how you have to put them in. But Mercedes used to outline a method where you'd freeze the guide and heat up the head and drive the guides in that way. Well, it turns out that method wasn't so good, because sometimes the heads would stay permanently expanded around the valve guide hole, and the valve guide would just come out. So now the protocol is to use silicon bronze guides with everything at room temperature, because if it goes in at room temperature and the two expand and heat up together, they're probably not going to have any issues. I've noticed that a lot of cars we get in that have loose guides, where the guides just come right out of the heads, are usually have additional problems with the machining, like additional worn out valves or additional cylinder head cutting that's gone way too far. And really, I don't think they allow you to take more than 3 millimeters off of one of these heads. It's not a lot of stuff. Actually, it may be 1 millimeter on these heads and 3 millimeters on like an M189 head. So I'm not exactly sure, but on these heads, I think it's 1/3 of a millimeter per cut. And after that, you have to find a better head, or get your head deck welded, or shim your cam up, or something. Now, if you like this video, please leave a like, share, and subscribe. This is information you're not going to get anywhere. So if you're into having like a 280 SL or a 230 SL, you came to the right place. And if you're supporting us on Patreon, we really thank you. And I'm going to try to do some other great machining videos in the future. So let me see here. I wanted to tell you guys one other thing, one more bonus tip. Oh yeah, there's a reason why there's a reason why you can't just let anybody touch a cylinder head in one of these things. But all the specifications, if you want to know, all the specifications for the minimum head thickness and maximum warpage limit are all in the technical data manual, that little blue book that has all these numbers and measurements in it that a lot of people just overlook. So if your machinist is not using a technical data manual, fire them. We'll see you in the next video.